Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about ancient Cambodia, more specifically the Khmer Empire and the ancient city of Angkor. Now, Angkor was the seat of the Khmer Empire for a while, and just like a lot of ancient empires, they slowly eroded and then quickly eroded and then they were gone. And the only thing left of Angkor is the famous shrine, which is Angkor Wat, which is the largest religious site in the world, I think. Yeah, I think it beats out a lot of other places. Despite the fact that this was a huge empire for probably close to a large part of 450, 500 years, depending on what records you read. Some say the Khmer Empire started in the 700s AD, some say 900s. But most people think that it ended around 1420, in the 1420s, I think, early 1400s. So yeah, give or take a century, 400 years. And in that time, it developed a reputation for being a huge, successful empire. It's really hard to pinpoint how it fell, according to all the different sources. Now, a lot of historians state that there was an invading force from the west that came in. They're called the Ayutthaya Kingdom. And one of the historians, I forgot his name, he has a Chinese name, Zhou something, starts with a Z, Zhou something. He was recording that there was a huge army that came in and eventually they overthrew the empire. Other sources state that there was a change of the religion, which is true. The religious history of the area is pretty interesting. So there was like the religions before the Khmer Empire, and then there was basically a version of Hinduism, and then Mahayana Buddhism around midway through the empire's life started to rise up, and then Hinduism came back and had a resurgence, and then Theravada Buddhism came, and pretty much that was the end of the empire because it eroded the workforce. The common populace lost faith in the royal class because of Buddhism. And Theravada Buddhism it's a more strict version of Buddhism compared to Mahayana Buddhism, which is more, I guess, liberal. It's more open, whereas Theravada is very rigid in what you can do. And so that basically spread all over the land and just affected the entire culture, essentially. There was a sort of insurrection and public support for the royals. Other reasons stated and backed up by science were natural disasters. So they studied these tree rings in Vietnam and other parts of Thailand, and they found that during this time there were insane amount of monsoons. There were instances of the bubonic plague, so disease was around, and then climate change. So there's a medieval warm period, and then the Little Ice Age, and that transition period was very destructive in terms of bringing droughts. The canals sort of dried up, their reservoirs dried up, and the monsoons came and just destroyed the infrastructure of the city. And which leads to the point of this whole video, which is the neglect of public work and services. So their waterways, their roads, the city maintenance, it just got neglected eventually. People just stopped focusing on those things, which is indicative of a lot of things. Like, there's probably more important things going on at the time, like invaders and all the reasons I listed before, loss of faith in the entire empire. So what I want to talk about here is what other contributions to the downfall of this city. In the ruins of the city, they and when I say they, I mean this research team, they found a lot of faults, and they analyzed basically what was left, and they deduced what happened and what contributed to the fall of the city. So like I said, monsoon-driven flooding weakened the water infrastructural network of Angkor, likely leading to the fall of this urban infrastructural network. And the crazy thing is, this is the largest of the pre-industrial world. This is a very highly advanced, well-planned out city. Basically, the scientists found vulnerabilities in this infrastructure, but at its peak, it must have looked amazing because everything was meticulously built in a certain way. And this is evidenced in Angkor Wat. If you look at photos of it, it's highly attuned to the sky above. So you can, I'll have a picture up in a second of the sun rises in a specific portion of the temple, and stars. There are alignments as well with where buildings are in the temple, and they align with stuff in the sky. It's very. They must have had some sort of advanced knowledge to pull all this off. Anyway, back to the city. The multifaceted infrastructural network seen in the city provided critical services to many people around the world. So Dan Penny and his colleagues, these are the guys who were in charge of the study. So the stability of the study was stressed by a lot of different things, like the climatic variation or climate change, the political insurrection, all that stuff. So what they did, they analyzed the topology of the ancient city, which featured, like I said, canals, moats, reservoirs, which distributed water resources to all the citizens, and it regulated the flooding. So in that area, there's a lot of heavy rain. So in order to kind of mitigate the damage, they had these flood channels all around the city just as a safety net. But even the huge monsoons, as evidenced by the tree ring study, that wasn't enough to contain all the water. So things just degraded very quickly. And you have to consider what that does to the mind of the average citizen. Here you have this beautiful city that people are care enough to take care of, and then suddenly there's all this rain and just bad, one after another of bad misfortunes heaping on top of each other. If you're a citizen, you probably think it's some sort of divine intervention, and that plus just looking around and seeing the city in ruins or just not being taken care of kind of makes you lose faith in the city, I would imagine. So none of that helped to helping the city become prosperous. So what they did was what the authors of the study did, Dan Penny and his group. They modeled the city's infrastructure network based on archaeological remote sensing and mapping, and then they applied a simulation model of erosion and sedimentation within the water of that model, and then they determined whether the process could change how water traveled through the network. And what they found was obviously their large floods would result in a systemic instability of the water distribution network. So in the upstream junctions, that's where most of the damage was. So anything upstream, they're inundated with so much water that it just fell apart. And they were able to recreate that in these models. So extreme rainfall occurred in the mainland Southeast Asia during the final decades of the 14th century, which is toward the very end of the end of the empire, or end of the city. It basically contributed to the fragmentation of the infrastructure. So here's a picture of Angkor. So you can see these tops, and depending on the time of the year, the sun moves across until I think it comes to a head up here, I think. I'm not sure. But I know that there's a huge correlation between the sun setting and when you face north, or when you face west or something like that, you can see the sun setting and rising. Well, if you look at it from the east, it's rising. So what do you guys know about the Khmer Empire? I know it's not, unless you go to college and you specifically study this area of Asian history, in grade school and high school and stuff, they don't really teach this in America. So what if you guys grew up in Asia, or if you happen to learn about this in school, is there anything I left out? I mean, I'm not. This video is not supposed to cover all of Khmer history or anything like that. This is specifically how the city fell. But it seems like there was a lot going on that caused a city which was a metropolis. I mean, at the time, it was probably one of the largest cities, period, in its heyday. And it seemed very, very advanced. And it just leaves you to wonder, they must have been inspired by other cities that must have been similar to this at some point. That either whether it existed concurrent with this city or maybe generations before, or maybe they read about the city plans, ancient city plans in books that were passed down to them. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem like this was completely novel, although it is a unique city for sure. It seems like this city planning, they didn't have the blueprint for it, so to speak. I think that they must have been inspired by something else. And I'm not trying to take credit away from them. They built the city. I mean, they planned it themselves and everything, but they must have been inspired by something, because that's a lot of thought put into a huge piece of land where people would occupy for centuries. So let me know what you guys think of the fall of Angkor, and if you guys have anything else to add, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.